Rain hammered against the windows of the small house in the quiet American suburb, each drop echoing like a distant drum. 10-year-old Noah Castillo lay awake in his bed, the rolling thunder outside matching the rhythmic pounding of his heart. Something felt off. He could sense it in the abrupt hush of the hallway, in the heavy presence that seemed to hang in the air. He slipped out from under his blanket, carefully so as not to wake his baby sister, Sofia, who slept in a crib near his bed. The faint glow of streetlights filtered through the curtains, illuminating the room just enough for Noah to see that Sofia was curled up peacefully, unaware of the commotion that was about to unfold. The corridor leading to the living room seemed longer than usual. Each step Noah took echoed in his mind as he tried to steady the growing sense of dread. A flash of lightning revealed the silhouette of his mother, Rebecca Castillo, kneeling on the floor near the couch with a suitcase open in front of her. She was packing clothing in a hasty, disorganized manner that Noah had never seen before. Her hands trembled, and her breath was quick, almost panicked. She didn't notice him at first. He paused in the shadows, uncertain if he should call out to her. The storm raged on outside, and a sudden roar of thunder startled him. It was enough to break the spell. She turned sharply, eyes wide, and for a moment they simply stared at each other. Noah's heart pounded louder as if trying to match the thunder. "Noah," Rebecca said, her voice hoarse. She looked as if she hadn't slept in days. Rain battered the windows, lightning illuminating her face to reveal deep worry etched into her features. I thought you were asleep." He stepped closer, noticing clothes strewn across the floor alongside baby supplies for Sofia. "Mom, what's happening?" he asked, trying his best to keep his voice from trembling. She hesitated, as though struggling to form the right words. Slowly, she zipped the suitcase shut and placed her hands gently on his shoulders. A flash of concern, maybe even fear, flickered in her eyes. "I need you to be brave, okay?" she whispered. "There's something I have to do. I'm sorry I'm leaving so suddenly, but I'll come back for you. I promise." Noah felt a surge of anxiety. He was only 10, but he knew enough to sense something was terribly wrong. "Where are you going?" he pressed, fighting the tears that threatened to surface. "What's happening?" She swallowed hard and reached into her jacket pocket. The storm outside seemed to intensify, as though reflecting the turmoil within her. Thunder rumbled again, shaking the thin walls of the house. Rebecca handed him a plain envelope. Inside, he found a small piece of paper with hurried handwriting. By the faint light of a nearby lamp, he managed to read the words, "Protect Sofia. Don't trust anyone. Stay away from Damian Carter." He looked up at her, puzzled and alarmed. The name was unfamiliar to him, and the warning felt as dire as the storm itself. Before he could ask another question, she pulled him into a tight hug, her arms trembling. "Do exactly what that note says," she murmured against his hair. "You have to protect your sister, understand?" She pulled away, gazing into his eyes as if memorizing every detail. "And you mustn't trust—" She stopped herself and shook her head. "Just keep Sofia safe. That's all I ask." Without waiting for him to reply, Rebecca grabbed the suitcase and moved toward the front door. Noah followed, panic building. He glanced at the note again. Damian Carter. The words lingered in his mind. Stay away from Damian Carter. He could barely fathom why his mother would flee into the night, let alone mention a name that sounded both strange and ominous. Lightning lit the yard, and Noah caught a glimpse of the car waiting in the driveway. Rebecca hesitated at the doorway, turning back for a final glance at her son. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "I love you both. Take care of your sister." And with that, she slipped outside into the raging storm, the door slamming behind her with a force that rattled the window panes. For a moment, Noah stood there, unable to move. His brain buzzed with questions. Where was she going? Who was Damian Carter? And how could he possibly protect his 1-year-old sister when he had no idea what danger they might be in? Another peal of thunder jolted him into action. He rushed back to the bedroom and found Sofia stirring awake, frightened by the noise. Gently, he lifted her from the crib, trying his best to soothe her with soft whispers. But her cries seemed to match the volume of the storm. Clutching Sofia close, he went back to the living room and peered out the window. The driveway was empty now. Headlights vanished into the darkness. His mother was gone. He felt alone and terrified, yet there was a strange resolve forming inside him. Protect Sofia. Don't trust anyone. Stay away from Damian Carter, the words repeated in his mind like a chant. He spent the rest of the night wide awake on the living room couch, rocking Sofia back to sleep while the storm raged on. Every flash of lightning made him jump. He imagined all sorts of terrible scenarios, scary men breaking into the house, something horrible happening to his mother. At one point, he considered calling the police, but he remembered the note's warning not to trust anyone. Still, the idea of calling the authorities lingered because he had no clue how else to find out what happened to her. As dawn approached, the storm began to subside, leaving behind a steady rain that pattered against the roof and windows like a relentless percussion. Sofia finally dozed off in his arms, and Noah gently set her in a makeshift crib of blankets on the couch. Exhaustion gnawed at him, but his mind wouldn't let him sleep. He paced around, tidying the chaos left behind from his mother's frantic packing. Every piece of clothing, every item strewn on the floor felt like a clue he needed to decipher. He found a half-zipped duffel bag under the dining table, stuffed with diapers, wipes, and a few jars of baby food. She had been preparing supplies for Sofia. That at least comforted him. She was still thinking about her children in her rush to leave. Despite the swirling questions in his mind, he couldn't help but admire how determined she must have been to secure their survival. When the sun rose, pale and hesitant behind layers of storm clouds, he placed Sofia back in her crib and tried to figure out what to do next. Every logical thought pointed him toward seeking help. Protecting Sofia alone seemed impossible. He could barely cook breakfast for himself, let alone for both of them. But the note warned him not to trust anyone. Was that meant to include the police? Or maybe it meant to avoid specific people tied to this Damian Carter? Noah's memories of his father were faint. He had died when Noah was very young, leaving only occasional stories that Rebecca would share. There was no other family he could call. No aunt, no uncle, no grandparents he knew well enough to phone. The walls of the house felt like they were closing in on him, and each drop of rain outside echoed with a hollow foreboding. He made a mental list of possibilities. He could try to find the address of a friend's parent, but then again, the note had explicitly said not to trust anyone. Even if it was meant literally, the only official place he could think of was the police station. And the more he turned it over in his mind, the more it made sense to at least let the authorities know his mother was missing. The conflict raged in his chest. He wanted to keep his mother's secret if that's what she needed. But the weight of taking care of a baby by himself was crushing. Maybe the police could protect Sofia, help figure out what was happening, and locate his mother. If the note warned him to avoid anyone, perhaps she had been speaking out of sheer paranoia, not a literal instruction. Or perhaps she intended only for him to avoid certain dangerous people. The swirling confusion was too much for a 10-year-old to bear. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, fading as it went. He imagined the police cruising around town searching for missing people or criminals. A pang of guilt and fear shot through him. What if the police labeled his mother a criminal? What if she had done something wrong? She had told him to stay away from some man who was supposed to be dead. That sounded like a story straight out of a thriller. None of it made sense. He looked down at Sofia, who was now fully awake, her big brown eyes fixed on him, as if sensing his turmoil. She let out a small whimper, and Noah lifted her into his arms again, rocking her gently to keep her from crying. He could see his reflection in her eyes, a boy on the edge of panic but determined not to crumble. He had to keep it together for Sofia's sake. "All right," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "We'll go to the police. We'll find help. Then we'll figure out where Mom went." He gathered a diaper bag and some of the supplies he'd found scattered on the floor. The steady rain outside was less intense than the night before, but it still soaked everything in sight. He found Sofia's stroller and a small umbrella, though the wind threatened to make that useless. He glanced at the note one last time, tucking it carefully into his jacket pocket. In a moment of resolve, he opened the door and stepped out onto the drenched porch, the sky a dull gray overhead. The streets were nearly empty. Rain pooled on the cracked sidewalks, and only a few cars splashed by now and then. One corner of him hoped he'd spot his mother's car rounding the bend, headlights flashing, and see her running back toward them with an explanation. But there was no sign of her, only the endless sheets of drizzle and the faint hum of the town waking up. With Sofia bundled securely, he took the first tentative steps down the slippery walkway. Fear clung to him, but he forced himself to keep going, one foot in front of the other. The police station stood a few blocks away, and each stride felt like moving through a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. Everything was unreal. The swirling storm, the deserted streets, the unspoken threats in his mother's warning. But he pressed on, clinging to the thought that maybe, just maybe, the police could help them find his mother. And if they could do that, if they could keep Sofia safe, then perhaps the strange name scrawled on that note would remain just that, an empty threat. Noah could not know that the name Damian Carter would soon come crashing into his life with a reality far darker than the stormy night that had just passed. By the time he reached the station, water seeped into his sneakers, and his jacket was damp. He held Sofia close, sheltering her best he could. The large concrete structure loomed above him, a stark reminder of adult authority and the unknown outcomes that waited inside. He hesitated at the entrance, heart pounding in his chest. Protect Sofia. Don't trust anyone. Stay away from Damian Carter. He took a deep breath. Then he pushed open the door, stepping into the pale fluorescent light of the lobby, determined to find answers, unaware of how deeply those answers would shake the fragile foundation of his world. Morning's gray light filtered through the wide glass windows of the police station lobby as Noah stood, water dripping from his jacket onto the tile floor. Sofia wriggled in his arms, her cheeks flushed, her tiny fists opening and closing in restless agitation. The receptionist at the front desk peered over her glasses, eyes flicking between the sopping wet boy and the baby he cradled. It was evident from the woman's puzzled expression that this was not a typical morning visitor. "Are you here alone, young man?" she asked gently, her tone a mix of concern and curiosity. She set aside a small stack of paperwork and came around the desk, bending slightly to meet Noah's gaze. Noah swallowed hard, forcing down the urge to turn and run back outside. His mother's warning buzzed in his mind, but desperation overpowered caution. He had nowhere else to turn. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. I need help. My mom, she's missing." The receptionist's eyes widened, and she motioned for him to follow her, leading him through a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." She brought him into a quieter hallway. The walls were lined with worn posters promoting community events and public safety tips. "I'll get someone to speak with you right away," she said, shooting him a sympathetic look. Within minutes, a female detective with warm brown eyes and dark cropped hair approached. She wore a navy blazer over a plain white blouse, her badge hanging from her belt. She introduced herself as Detective Elena Morales. Her voice held a calm reassurance, as though she'd comforted frightened children many times before. "Hey there," she said, crouching to Noah's eye level. "I hear you're looking for your mom. Why don't we go to a more private room and talk?" He nodded, hugging Sofia close. Elena led them down another corridor where they entered a small interview room with a rectangular table and 4 chairs. The walls were plain except for a large window covered by Venetian blinds. Elena's presence seemed gentle, yet firm, like a teacher who knew when to show kindness and when to show authority. She brought a blanket and carefully wrapped it around Sofia, smiling softly as the baby nuzzled into the warm fabric. "She's beautiful," Elena said, meeting Noah's eyes with a reassuring nod. "How old is she?" "Almost 1, Noah replied, taking a seat. He placed Sofia on his lap, noticing how the blanket dwarfed her small frame. "Her name is Sofia. I'm Noah." Elena folded her arms on the table, her expression a mixture of empathy and professionalism. "Noah, can you tell me what happened with your mom? When was the last time you saw her?" He hesitated, the events of the previous night still raw in his mind. It was one thing to repeat them to himself, another to recount them to a stranger. "It was late. Last night," he began. "It was storming hard and I woke up. I saw her packing a suitcase. She gave me a note, then she left." Elena's brow furrowed. "She gave you a note?" Noah gently shifted Sofia to his other arm and dug into the pocket of his jacket, retrieving the slightly crumpled envelope. He laid it on the table. It said... His voice faltered as he recalled the exact words. It said to protect Sofia, not to trust anyone, and to stay away from someone named Damian Carter. A flicker of recognition passed over Elena's features, like a shadow fleeting across her eyes. She picked up the envelope, reading the note inside. Her expression grew more serious. "Damian Carter?" she repeated, pursing her lips. "That's interesting. Noah, do you know who that is?" He shook his head. "I've never heard of him before, but my mom..." His voice tightened as anxiety threatened to overwhelm him. "She looked really scared. She told me to keep Sofia safe. Then she ran out. I don't even know where she went." Elena glanced at the note again, her face betraying a swirl of emotions. "All right," she said softly, placing the envelope aside. "First, let's make sure you and Sofia are taken care of. You both must be exhausted. We have a children's services liaison here who can help get you some warm clothes and maybe a place to rest while we look for your mom. Sound good?" Noah hesitated, remembering Rebecca's warning not to trust anyone, but he saw no other option. Sofia needed warmth, food, and safety. He himself felt on the verge of collapse after a sleepless night. "Okay," he agreed, nodding. Elena offered him a reassuring smile, then stepped outside for a moment. Through the slightly open door, Noah heard snippets of her conversation with someone. Words like missing mother, strange note, and Damian Carter drifted into the room. He wondered if coming here had been the right choice. Would the police actually be able to help? Or was he exposing them both to dangers he couldn't even understand? She returned with a tall, kind-looking woman named Nora, who introduced herself as part of the department's Child and Family Services team. Nora wore a pastel cardigan and had a gentle, maternal air about her. She led Noah and Sofia to a small break room down the hall, where she offered him a cup of hot chocolate and a bottle of warm milk for the baby. The steam from the hot chocolate wafted up, reminding him how cold he still felt. As Sofia drank from the bottle, Nora gently dabbed the baby's damp hair with a soft towel, cooing soothing words. Noah sipped his hot chocolate, grateful for the warmth, but feeling uneasy as he caught glimpses of officers hurrying past the hallway door, exchanging urgent whispers. Before he could finish the drink, Detective Elena appeared again, her expression grave. "Noah," she said, her voice measured, We found something. A man was discovered in an alley a few blocks from here, injured. He was saying your mother's name." Noah's heart pounded. "A man?" he echoed, looking down at Sofia in his arms. He had to steady her because his grip trembled. Was it Damian Carter?" Elena hesitated, eyes narrowing slightly as though she was weighing what to reveal. He had no identification on him, but from the description and some tattoos, yes, it appears he might be Damian Carter. He's in the hospital now, undergoing emergency treatment. We haven't been able to speak with him in detail. Fear jolted through Noah. The name had lived only on a slip of paper hours before. Now it took on flesh and blood. If he was truly alive, then why would Rebecca say to stay away from him? She had believed he was dead. Or at least that was how Noah had interpreted her warning. The pieces didn't fit, but the sense of looming danger only grew. "Is he dangerous?" Noah asked, voice quavering. "We're not certain yet," Elena replied. "The medics who found him said he mentioned your mom's name several times before passing out. We don't know the extent of his injuries or his involvement in her disappearance. We're treating him as both a potential suspect and a possible victim." A small whine from Sofia interrupted the moment, drawing the adult's attention. Nora quickly turned her focus back to the baby, bouncing her lightly to keep her calm. Noah stared at Elena, a swirl of conflicting emotions clouding his mind. Did this mean the police would view his mother as someone linked to a criminal? Or could it be that she was in danger herself? "Elena," Noah said quietly, My mom never told me about this man. I don't understand what's happening. But she was scared. I don't think she did anything wrong. She was just—" He trailed off, uncertain how to finish. Elena knelt down to his eye level, resting a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We're not blaming your mom for anything," she said gently. "We want to find her and make sure she's safe. Damian Carter being alive is surprising, but it might help us figure out what's going on. As soon as he's stable enough to talk, we'll question him." She paused, a furrow forming in her brow as though she was deliberating whether to share another piece of information. Finally, she spoke again, her tone cautious. "Noah, we ran a quick background check on your mother. There's nothing criminal there, but there are parts of her record that seem sealed or redacted. We're not sure why. Sometimes that happens if someone is involved in federal investigations or has been part of a witness protection program. We need more time to sort it out." Witness protection, federal investigations. The words sounded foreign to Noah, more suited to a dramatic television show than his real life. He glanced at Sofia, who had calmed down in Nora's arms, as though she sensed they were no longer out in the storm. "You think my mom was in some kind of witness protection?" he asked, voice trembling. "It's a possibility," Elena replied, choosing her words with care. "But I don't want to speculate too much. The important thing right now is that we keep you and your sister safe. We've got an officer stationed outside the hospital room where Damian Carter is being treated, in case there's any threat." Noah's head spun with the revelations. Could his mother have hidden a past so secret that even the police had trouble accessing it? If so, maybe the name on that note wasn't the only danger. The storm that had howled last night seemed mild compared to the forces swirling around them now. Nora cleared her throat gently. "Detective, perhaps we can provide a temporary shelter for the children. Noah's been through a lot, maybe a supervised rest area here or at our transitional housing facility, just until we know more." Elena nodded. "Yes, that's a good idea." She turned to Noah. "We'll keep you close, where we can protect you, and we'll keep searching for your mom. Meanwhile, if you remember anything at all, please let us know." Noah looked down at the floor, still clutching the note in his jacket pocket. "Protect Sofia. Don't trust anyone. Stay away from Damian Carter." His mother's warnings echoed in his mind, conflicting with the present reality. The police seemed earnest in wanting to help, and yet her words suggested they might not be trustworthy. But maybe she didn't mean the police in general. Maybe she meant specific people. Or maybe she simply feared that no one could be trusted, no matter their uniform. He lifted his gaze to Elena, who waited with a patience that conveyed genuine concern. "I promise I'll tell you if I remember more," he managed, trying to steady his nerves. "Just please find my mom." A sad, empathetic smile crossed Elena's face. "We'll do everything we can," she assured him. As Nora led Noah and Sofia to a quiet room near the back of the building, he couldn't help but feel a gnawing doubt. Some inner voice whispered that trusting them might be a mistake, yet he had no alternative. In that small, windowless room with a single cot and a couple of chairs, he gently rocked Sofia, who was finally drifting into a well-deserved sleep. The hum of air conditioning replaced the roar of last night's storm, but the tension in Noah's chest was as fierce as ever. He found himself replaying his mother's last words over and over. She had seemed so certain, so terrified. Did she know more than she told him? Of course she did, but would it have made a difference to share it with a 10-year-old? The weight of uncertainty settled on him like a suffocating blanket, and he realized that the search for answers was just beginning. Detective Elena Morales watched from behind the one-way glass of an observation room as Noah carefully laid Sofia on a fold-out cot. The boy moved with a tenderness and protective instinct that pulled at her heart. She understood the complexities of police work all too well, but it always struck her how the children affected by these adult problems were forced to grow up too soon. She turned away, letting the blinds fall back into place. Her colleague, Officer Paul Kingston, stood beside her with a tablet in hand. "This is the strangest lead I've ever had," he said in a low voice. "Damian Carter was presumed dead years ago, right? I remember hearing rumors, but it was never official." Elena nodded, crossing her arms. He was associated with a criminal syndicate, or so the old case files suggested, but nothing conclusive. If he's alive, it means someone went to great lengths to hide him, or that he faked his death to escape something worse. Paul hesitated, flipping through digital documents. You said you found redacted entries in Rebecca Castillo's background check? Yeah, it's not just your typical sealing of juvenile records or anything like that, Elena replied. Whole sections are blacked out. It looks more like something you'd see in a federal-level witness protection file. We need clearance. We don't have to see the rest. A hush lingered in the hallway before Elena sighed. She walked toward the door that led back to the main floor, her mind racing. I'll question Carter as soon as the doctors say he's stable. If he's connected to Rebecca's disappearance, maybe he can tell us where to find her. Meanwhile, keep an eye on that kid. If he's important to her, you can bet he's important to anyone who's after her. Paul gave a curt nod, understanding the gravity of the situation. I'll stick around. Let me know what you hear from the hospital. Elena thanked him and stepped into the corridor. The lights overhead felt harsh, and the painted walls, once a soothing shade of pale green, now seemed to close in on her. She'd seen many missing persons cases, but something about Rebecca Castillo tugged at her differently. Maybe it was the desperation in Noah's eyes, or the mention of a name so deeply entwined with rumors of organized crime. She felt a wave of responsibility to keep the boy safe, and a twinge of something else, a personal stake, as though some unseen cord connected her to this case more than she cared to admit. She made her way to her desk, where a small framed photo of her younger sister reminded her why she had joined the force in the first place, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. She spent the next hour combing through local records, searching for any mention of Rebecca Castillo, Damian Carter, or any possible associates. The rain outside had calmed to a dreary drizzle, but an unspoken tension lingered in the station, as if everyone sensed this was no ordinary case. A short while later, a call came in from the hospital. Damian Carter was out of surgery, in stable condition, but still unconscious. Elena wasted no time. She grabbed her coat and signaled to Paul to watch over Noah and Sofia while she left. She didn't want the boy picking up any more fears than necessary, so she chose not to inform him yet. If Damian Carter truly had answers, Elena needed them first. The drive to the hospital was a monotonous stretch of wet pavement and traffic lights that blinked in dull amber reflections across the windshield. Elena's mind whirred with questions. Why had Rebecca told Noah to stay away from Carter? Why had Carter apparently called out for Rebecca when he was found? Could they be on the same side, or were they at odds? Upon arriving, she flashed her badge at the nurse's station and was directed to the critical care ward. Outside Carter's room, a uniformed officer stood guard, acknowledging Elena with a nod. She entered quietly, the steady beep of monitors and the antiseptic smell of the hospital tugging at her senses. Damian Carter lay still on the bed, an IV snaking into his arm. He had bandages across his torso and shoulder, the visible edges stained with antiseptic solution. His face was pale, jaw clenched, even in unconsciousness. Elena could see hints of tattoos peeking out from under his medical gown, symbols that often marked loyalty to certain groups. She wondered what kind of life he'd led and what secrets he held. A doctor approached, quietly explaining that Carter had lost a significant amount of blood and needed time to recover. Elena asked if it was possible to question him soon. The doctor shook his head. He's still sedated. Maybe by tomorrow morning if he regains consciousness. With nothing else to glean, Elena returned to the station. She found Paul in the break room, chatting quietly with Noah, who was anxiously bouncing Sofia on his lap. As soon as Noah saw Elena, he stood, his expression hopeful. Did you find out anything about my mom? Did that man say where she is? Elena shook her head gently. He's still unconscious. I couldn't talk to him. She saw Noah's face fall, and she felt a pang of sympathy. We haven't given up, Noah. We're doing everything we can. In the meantime, we want you and Sofia to stay here under our protection. We'll make sure you have food, clothes, anything you need. Noah nodded, his gaze drifting to the floor. "Thank you," he whispered. Though he was only 10, his stance carried the weight of an older sibling who had just realized how big the world could be. Paul reached out a hand, ruffling Noah's hair in a gentle attempt to comfort him. Then he asked Elena if they should contact Child Protective Services for a temporary foster placement. She hesitated. Usually that would be standard procedure, but something in her gut insisted it might not be safe to hand the children over to anyone outside the station just yet. She told Paul they should wait a bit longer, at least until the situation with Carter clarified. Later that afternoon, Elena led Noah to a small office where they could talk privately. Sofia dozed in a nearby bassinet that one of the staff had borrowed from a supply room. Elena gestured for Noah to sit across from her at a wooden desk piled with folders. She tried to keep her voice gentle, aware that each question might be stirring heartbreak. "Noah, I know this is hard, but I need you to think carefully. Did your mom ever mention anything about her past? Maybe places she lived before coming here, people she used to know, anything at all?" He fiddled with his shoelaces, brow furrowed in concentration. "Not really. She always said she grew up in the Midwest, but we never visited. She never talked much about family. There's no one else who comes around. Just us." Elena nodded, jotting down notes. "What about pictures or letters at home? Did you ever find anything that might hint at another life?" Noah hesitated, recalling random fragments of memory. She used to hide old photo albums in the closet. I peeked once. There was a man in some of them. I don't know his name. Not my dad, though. Then one day, she threw the albums away. She said they were out of date. I never really understood why. A flicker of speculation crossed Elena's face. "Okay, what about people who visited your house? Friends of your mom, acquaintances, co-workers? Did she ever talk about them?" He shook his head. "She never brought anyone home. It was always just me and Sofia. She worked at a diner for a while, but then she quit. She said she found something better. She never explained what." Elena wrote down each detail. The more she learned, the more it seemed that Rebecca Castillo had led a life deliberately closed off from others, like a fortress built around her family to keep out a threat no one else could see. "Thank you, Noah," she said softly, laying down her pen. "Everything you remember is helpful." His eyes glistened, and for a moment he looked as though he might cry. Then he squared his shoulders, forcing composure. "Will you really find her?" Elena glanced at the sleeping Sofia, then back at Noah. "We'll do everything in our power," she promised. That evening, she arranged a temporary setup for Noah and Sofia in a secure room within the station. It wasn't warm and homey, but it was safe. Nora from Child and Family Services checked on them periodically, ensuring Sofia had enough formula and diapers, and that Noah had something to eat. Meanwhile, word spread throughout the station that a supposed dead man named Damian Carter was lying in a hospital, connected to the disappearance of a mother with a sealed file. Cops whispered theories in hushed tones. Some suggested Rebecca might be running drugs. Others surmised she was fleeing an abusive partner, while a few speculated involvement with a larger criminal enterprise. Elena dismissed the gossip, focusing on the evidence at hand and her gut instinct that there was more to the story. Late that night, as the fluorescent lights hummed softly, Elena sat at her desk, flipping through every scrap of information about Carter's ties to the criminal underworld. She found references to a defunct syndicate suspected of arms dealing and extortion. The investigations had dried up or been sealed off, possibly due to deals with federal agencies. Could Rebecca have been an informant, or was she an unwilling participant? Her eyes ached from reading. She sipped lukewarm coffee, ignoring the stale taste. All the while, she couldn't help but think of the 2 children resting in the back of the station. If Rebecca had risked everything to protect them, that meant the people hunting her were ruthless. If they discovered the children were here, would they come? The phone on her desk buzzed, startling her out of her thoughts. It was the hospital calling again. She braced herself, hoping for news that Damian Carter had woken and was ready to talk, but the voice on the other end informed her that he had slipped in and out of consciousness, delirious, muttering about Rebecca and running. He wasn't coherent enough to be questioned yet. Elena thanked the nurse and hung up, frustration coiling inside her. The puzzle pieces were scattered, and the biggest piece, Rebecca, remained elusive. If only she could speak to this Carter, she might finally unearth how it all connected. The hours ticked by with no further calls, leaving her in a stagnant limbo of half-truths and anxious imaginings. Eventually, she found her way to the small break room where Paul had dozed off in an uncomfortable chair, arms crossed over his chest. A hush filled the station as midnight came and went. She peered in on Noah and Sofia one last time. Noah was curled up on a makeshift bed, arms protectively around his sister. The soft rise and fall of their breathing offered a quiet reassurance that, for the moment, they were safe. Still, Elena couldn't shake the sense that forces beyond this small-town station were in motion, creeping closer with each passing hour. Rebecca Castillo's past, whatever it was, had cast a long shadow, now reaching her children, and somewhere tangled in that darkness lay the truth about Damian Carter's miraculous return. Elena took a silent vow then and there. She would unravel the secrets behind Rebecca's disappearance, no matter where the trail led. In a corner of her mind, a nagging uncertainty whispered that not everyone in the department could be trusted. Corruption and leaks were rare, but not impossible. She thought of the sealed records, the cryptic warnings, the countless ways a case like this could go wrong. All she knew for sure was that a mother's final instructions to her son had been clear. Protect Sofia, don't trust anyone, and stay away from Damian Carter. Yet here they were, already entwined with the very man she'd hoped to keep away. As Elena closed the door to let the children rest, she realized that the deeper she delved, the more she felt as though she, too, was stepping into a labyrinth of shifting allegiances and hidden truths. Her final glance at the sleeping siblings lingered in her mind as she returned to her desk. She had questions that demanded answers. For their sake, and for reasons she couldn't fully articulate, she intended to find them. A pale dawn light crept through the blinds of the police station, painting the corridors in stripes of gray and gold. Though most of the officers had returned to their daily routines, an undercurrent of tension still clung to the air. Word had spread about the missing mother who left a cryptic note, and about the man who was supposed to be dead but now lay injured in a hospital. Some officers whispered theories, others studied old files, but very few details seemed to fit together in any coherent pattern. In the secure room set aside for them, Noah stirred awake on the small cot. Sofia was fussing in her makeshift crib, and he struggled to sit up, bleary-eyed from another restless night. Still, he rushed to soothe her, gently lifting the baby and murmuring soft words until her anxious cries faded into sniffles. Outside, he could hear footsteps crossing the hallway, the muffled chatter of phones ringing, and an undercurrent of urgent conversation. Nora, the Child and Family Services worker, entered carrying a small bag of pastries. She smiled warmly and handed one to Noah. "We don't have a full breakfast here," she said, apologetic, "but I thought this might tide you over until I can arrange something more substantial." Noah nodded, murmuring a thank you. Nora checked on Sofia, making sure she had clean diapers and formula. Ever since they arrived, Nora had been kind, but Noah still felt a nagging unease. His mother's warning replayed in his mind. Don't trust anyone. And yet here he was, allowing strangers to care for them. If there were people who posed a threat to him and Sofia, how could he be sure they weren't already in the station, quietly gathering information? His gaze darted around the room, noticing for the first time how the blinds on the single narrow window were always kept half closed, and how the overhead light flickered with a soft hum. A sense of entrapment washed over him. He held Sofia close and turned to Nora. "Can I walk around a bit? I just need some air." Nora hesitated. "I'm not sure Detective Morales wants you roaming the station, but maybe we can go for a walk in the courtyard out back if that's okay. She mentioned wanting to talk to you again, so please stay nearby." Noah nodded. He slipped on his jacket and carefully balanced Sofia in his arms. They made their way through the corridors until they reached a small courtyard, a patch of concrete with a few potted plants and a single wooden bench. The sky was still overcast, and the air carried a faint chill. It was hardly the fresh air he craved, but at least it was outside. Nora settled on the bench, letting Noah stand beside her as he bounced Sofia gently. "We're doing everything we can to locate your mother," she said in a comforting tone. "The detective is working tirelessly." He forced a small smile, but his thoughts were elsewhere. She's trying her best, he reminded himself, but what if the danger is bigger than any of them realize? A moment later, Detective Elena Morales appeared at the door leading back into the station, stepping into the courtyard with an air of hurried purpose. She wore the same navy blazer from before, though now it was slightly rumpled, as if she'd been too busy to straighten it. "Noah," she called gently, beckoning him. He walked over, Sofia still nestled against his shoulder. Nora took a step back, giving them privacy. Elena regarded Noah with a sympathetic look. "You doing all right?" she asked, her voice subdued. Noah shrugged. "I guess so. I just want to know if you found anything more about my mom." Elena's expression hardened, the professional mask slipping back into place. "We've run into some roadblocks," she admitted. "We tried to access more of Rebecca's records, but they're sealed under federal authority. It's going to take time to get clearance." She paused, glancing around as if wary of being overheard. "Damian Carter is still in and out of consciousness at the hospital, but the doctors say he might be able to talk soon. If so, we'll have our best chance yet at unraveling where your mom might have gone." Noah mustered the courage to ask a question that had been clawing at him ever since he arrived. "Detective Morales, my mom's note said not to trust anyone. Why would she say that if she knew the police might help me? Do you think she meant I shouldn't trust the police?" Elena's face flickered with an unreadable emotion. She sighed softly. "I don't know, Noah. Maybe she was just panicked. Or maybe she feared someone specific was after her, someone who could be anywhere. Sometimes people in trouble don't know who they can rely on." He scrutinized her carefully. "Do you think she's in trouble with some criminal group?" Elena hesitated. If she was in witness protection, that usually means she provided testimony or evidence against dangerous people. She rubbed her forehead in frustration. "But that's speculation. I'm not sure yet." Before Noah could press further, a uniformed officer opened the courtyard door and called out to Elena. "Detective, you have a phone call. It's urgent." Elena gave Noah a quick nod. "I'll be right back," she said. "Stay here with Nora." She vanished inside, the door snapping shut behind her. Noah paced the courtyard, feeling tension coil in his stomach. Sofia fussed, as if absorbing his anxious energy. He tried to steady his breathing. Something about the detective's answers felt incomplete. She seemed genuine, but how could he be certain? His mother's final words still clung to him like a film he couldn't wash off. Soon, Elena reemerged, looking troubled. "Noah," she said quietly, "Damian Carter is awake, but the doctors say he's confused. I need to go to the hospital and see if we can get anything out of him." A sudden flash of hope lit Noah's eyes. "Can I come with you? Maybe if he sees me, he'll—" Elena cut him off, shaking her head. "Absolutely not. It's too risky, and he's in no state to speak with a minor. You need to stay here with Nora." She exchanged a few quick words with Nora, then hurried off, leaving Noah feeling more isolated than ever. He clutched Sofia's tiny hand, longing for any sense of control over the situation. They returned indoors, moving down a corridor that led back to the room where they'd been staying. On the way, Nora paused to speak to another staff member about some paperwork, leaving Noah momentarily unattended in the hallway. That was when he heard Elena's voice drifting from around a corner. It was muffled, but something in her tone made him freeze. Curiosity tugged at him, and he took a few quiet steps closer, pressing himself against the wall. Elena spoke in a low, urgent tone, clearly on a phone call. "No, I'm telling you, we can't let the boy leave, not yet," she said, her voice tight. A pause. "Yes, I understand. I'm aware of the sealed records. The last thing we need is him running off and drawing attention." Noah's heart pounded in his chest. He leaned forward just enough to catch more words, careful not to be seen. "Yes, the mother. She's gone off the grid. We can't confirm her location. Carter's alive, but it's complicated. Listen, I have my reasons for keeping this quiet. If the syndicate even suspects—" She stopped suddenly, as if sensing she wasn't alone. Panicking, Noah ducked back into the hallway, nearly stumbling over a mop bucket. By the time Elena stepped into view, phone in hand, Noah stood near Nora, feigning interest in the posters on the wall. His mind reeled. Whom had Elena been talking to? She'd mentioned the syndicate and seemed determined not to let him leave the station. He forced himself to remain calm. Maybe Elena was simply following standard procedures. Still, the conversation sounded ominous, as if she were shielding him for reasons beyond a simple police case. Or worse, maybe she was involved in some deeper plan he didn't understand. His mother's warning sang loudly in his ears. Don't trust anyone. When Nora finished her paperwork, they continued to the small room. Noah set Sofia in the bassinet, arms trembling. He felt trapped. Elena had said not to let him leave, and maybe that was just about ensuring his safety. But it stung to think that he might be a prisoner here, albeit a well-treated one. Sofia began to whimper, hungry again, and Nora stepped out to grab formula. Noah took advantage of the momentary solitude. He dug into his pocket, retrieving the note his mother left. The paper now slightly crumpled and stained by the events of the past days. Protect Sofia. Don't trust anyone. Stay away from Damian Carter. That last directive was already broken, in a sense, since Carter was in the hospital and part of the active investigation. But what if the first two lines still applied? Protect Sofia. Don't trust anyone. He remembered the conversation he'd overheard. Elena had mentioned sealed records and a syndicate. Perhaps he needed to investigate this on his own. The station might be the last place to find real answers if someone inside was leaking information or had hidden motives. He eyed the door, calculating a way out. If he stayed, waiting passively, he might never find out what truly happened to his mother. Noah's thoughts turned to the clue from the envelope. His mother had scribbled an address on the backside of the note, a location near an old train station on the outskirts of town. It was the only solid lead he had. The idea seemed reckless. He was only 10, and he had a baby in tow. But the more he considered it, the more it felt like the only path forward. If Elena was in contact with someone connected to the syndicate, waiting around for her to solve the mystery could be dangerous. Maybe his mother had intended for him to be resourceful. That night, the station quieted down, with most officers heading home or switching to the night shift. Nora stopped by once more to check on them, leaving a warm blanket and a bottle of formula for Sofia. Around 10 o'clock, she said her goodbyes, promising she or another staff member would be around if he needed anything. Noah waited until the hall lights dimmed. He peeked out from the slightly open door. A single officer was stationed at the far end, leaning against a desk and scrolling through a phone. Another officer popped into a break room, presumably for a late coffee. Noah's heart hammered in his chest. The plan wasn't foolproof, but he had to try. He gently wrapped Sofia in a small blanket, cradling her as he snuck into the corridor. The baby whimpered softly, and he held his breath, stepping on the balls of his feet to minimize noise. 1 step, 2 steps. A wave of relief washed over him when the officer at the desk remained engrossed in his phone. Slipping past the main lobby door proved to be the hardest part. Another officer was chatting with the night receptionist, but they were distracted by a lively conversation about local sports. Noah quickly darted behind a row of chairs. He inched along the wall until he reached the glass doors leading outside. The tension felt like a knot in his gut. Every second stretched by the possibility that someone might glance his way. He pressed the door's metal bar. It swung open and a gust of cool night air hit him. He kept moving, head down, until he reached the sidewalk. Only after he was half a block away did he exhale. The street was lit by sparse lampposts, and the occasional passing car made his pulse spike in fear. Anyone could be watching, friends or foes. But he pressed on, forcing his feet to move forward. This was for Sofia, for his mother. He had scribbled the train station address on his hand for quick reference, cross-referencing it with a map he'd spotted on the station wall earlier that day. It was several miles away on foot, and with night settling in, it felt like crossing a chasm, but adrenaline and determination fueled him. He clutched Sofia tightly, whispering apologies for subjecting her to the cold air. The further he got from the station, the more the streetlights thinned out. Puddles from the previous storms dotted the sidewalks, reflecting the moon's silvery glow. Noah's breath misted in front of him. He worried about how long Sofia could handle the night chill, but she was wrapped snugly, and her quiet breathing suggested she was fighting sleep in his arms. Block after block, Noah pressed on, half expecting a police car to screech to a stop beside him at any moment. Yet no one came. The city seemed indifferent, a silent labyrinth of concrete and flickering neon signs. Cars occasionally rumbled by, but they paid no heed to the small figure hurrying along the sidewalk. He couldn't help recalling the dread in his mother's eyes when she fled. Whatever danger she faced was enough to make her vanish in the dead of night. As he turned a corner, following a road that led to the outskirts of town, he mulled over the conversation he'd overheard from Elena. She had specifically mentioned not letting Noah leave the station. Was it just standard procedure or something more nefarious? Eventually, the cityscape gave way to emptier streets lined with closed shops and towering warehouses. A rusted sign pointed toward an industrial zone, and beyond that, the old train station. Noah's heart pounded with every step, not just from the physical strain, but from the knowledge that once he reached his destination, he'd be on his own to confront whatever secrets lay hidden there. Even if it was just an abandoned building, it might hold the key to understanding why his mother ran away and why she had ties, apparently, to someone as dangerous as Damian Carter. Ahead, he could just make out the silhouette of the station's old clock tower against the night sky, a relic of an era when trains were the lifeblood of the town. Now it stood abandoned, plastered with graffiti and overshadowed by the hiss of distant highways. Noah paused to catch his breath. The interior was sure to be dark and potentially dangerous, but he had come this far. He glanced down at Sofia. Her eyelids drooped, and she let out a soft sigh. She deserved warmth and safety, not this midnight trek. A pang of guilt twisted in his chest, but he reminded himself he was doing this for her sake, for both of their sakes. If he could find clues or signs of their mother here, they might finally uncover the truth. Tightening his grip on Sofia, he stepped forward. The derelict train station loomed ominously, an imposing monument of forgotten stories, and somewhere within its shadows, he hoped he would find the answers that would lead them back to Rebecca. A faint moon hung above the deserted train station, casting weak slivers of light through jagged holes in the roof. Crickets chirped in the nearby fields, their song echoing across the empty tracks. Noah stood at the entrance, Sofia cradled in his arms, her small face pressed against his shoulder. The place smelled of damp concrete and rusted metal, layered with the stale reek of abandonment. A single broken turnstile led into a large foyer littered with cracked tiles and scattered debris. Old train schedules were still pinned to the walls, their faded letters announcing arrival and departure times that had been irrelevant for years. Graffiti in vibrant reds, blues, and yellows sprawled across every surface, like the rebellious signatures of the local youth. Though the station had been shut down long before Noah was born, it clearly hadn't been entirely forgotten. Thunder rumbled in the distance. He remembered the storms from a few nights ago and how everything had changed in the blink of an eye. That memory spurred him forward. He carefully maneuvered around broken glass and crumbling steps, scanning the darkness for any sign that someone else might be inside. His footfalls echoed, and with each echo, a wave of anxiety gripped him. He tried to move silently, acutely aware that if the place wasn't entirely abandoned, whoever lurked in the shadows might not be friendly. At length, he approached a row of metal lockers. Most of them were dented and rusted, their doors hanging open. One or two, however, remained locked and intact. This area matched the address scrawled on the back of his mother's note, the southwestern wing of the station's foyer. He spotted the number 317, etched on a locker door, the same number he'd seen near the address scribbles. Heart pounding, he stepped closer. Setting Sofia gently on a relatively clean patch of floor, he knelt beside her, offering a quick whisper of reassurance. She fussed, her eyelids fluttering, but he managed to calm her with a soft lullaby he recalled his mother singing. While humming, he inspected the locker door, A single padlock secured it. He gave it a tug. The metal creaked but held firm. He stood, scanning the floor for anything that might help him pry it open. After a brief search, he found a small metal rod, likely part of some old station fixture. Kneeling again, he wedged the rod into the padlock's loop and applied pressure. His arm shook with the effort, not just from the physical strain, but from the tension swirling inside him. The lock groaned in protest, but refused to give. Biting his lip, he tried a different angle. This time, the rod slipped free. He stumbled backward and nearly fell onto Sofia, who let out a startled cry. "Shh," he whispered, heart racing. "It's okay. I've got you." He scooped her up again, bouncing her gently until she quieted down. But now her cries had echoed through the station's eerie silence, and for a moment, Noah feared someone might have heard. He froze, listening. Nothing. Only the persistent hum of wind through broken windows. Determined, he placed Sofia down again, carefully out of harm's way, and gave the locker door another try. This time, he jammed the metal rod under the padlock's body and twisted with all his might. With a sickening snap, the lock broke. Noah's hands trembled as he pried the locker door open, a surge of adrenaline fueling him. Inside, he discovered a small duffel bag and a file folder wrapped in plastic. He wasted no time, unzipping the duffel to reveal stacks of currency, American bills in neat bundles, along with various other items, a burner phone, baby supplies, even a small handgun. The sight of the weapon sent a cold shiver down his spine. He quickly zipped the bag shut and turned his attention to the folder, his fingers shaking as he peeled off the plastic cover. The folder contained documents he struggled to understand, copies of old police reports, records with official stamps, and a few photographs. One photo showed his mother standing beside Damian Carter, both dressed in what appeared to be formal attire, their expressions unreadable. Another showed Rebecca with a man Noah had never seen before. The edges of some papers were heavily redacted, entire paragraphs blacked out. But the letterhead on one page read, Department of Justice Witness Protection Program. Witness protection. So Elena had been right about that. He scanned a typed report with partial lines visible. Rebecca Castillo, cooperating witness, testimony critical. Damian Carter, alleged associate. Most of the rest was blacked out, but it didn't take much for Noah to guess that his mother had once been involved with something far more serious than he'd ever imagined. The next paper rattled him even further. It was a profile of a criminal syndicate, complete with mugshots of dangerous-looking individuals. Words like extortion, arms trafficking, and money laundering jumped out at him. He stared, heart racing, as the pieces began to connect. His mother must have had knowledge of the syndicate's operations, knowledge dangerous enough to require witness protection. Damian Carter had either been a partner or a fellow informant, or perhaps an enemy. The cryptic note about staying away from him might have been out of fear for his betrayal or fear for his life. Sofia stirred again, pulling him from his thoughts. He quickly gathered the folder and stuffed it back into the duffel bag, deciding to take it with him. Whatever these documents were, they might hold the key to finding his mother, but the presence of a handgun in the bag made his chest tighten. Was she planning to defend herself against the syndicate? Or had she already? A sudden noise made him jerk upright. It sounded like a scuff against concrete, not far from where he stood. He froze, clutching Sofia close and willing himself to blend into the darkness. The noise came again, a faint shuffle of footsteps. He could see nothing in the gloom beyond the edge of a collapsed ceiling panel. Noah's throat went dry. He considered fleeing, but realized that any quick movement might draw attention. Instead, he gently set Sofia down and positioned himself in front of her. A silhouette appeared in the dim corridor leading to the next room, his heart hammered. Then, in the faint glow of moonlight, Detective Elena Morales stepped into view. He felt both relief and a fresh wave of terror. How had she found him here? Had she followed him? Or was she always planning to come to this station? "Noah," Elena said, her voice echoing softly in the cavernous space. She approached with cautious steps, raising her hands in a placating gesture. "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." His mind reeled. She had told him not to leave the station, yet here she was, tracking him in the middle of the night. "How did you know where to find me?" he asked, trying to keep his voice from trembling. Her expression flickered with something akin to regret. "When I realized you were gone, I checked the map you used back at the station. I saw the route you might take. I know this place has some significance to your mother." He hugged Sofia tighter, studying Elena's face for any hint of deception. "Why did you want me to stay at the station so badly?" he demanded, anger rising in his voice. "I overheard your phone call. You said you couldn't let me leave. You mentioned a syndicate." Elena sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Noah, please try to understand. If your mother was part of witness protection, that means she's in danger, and so are you and Sofia. The syndicate she helped put away isn't gone. Some of its members are still out there. I wanted to keep you safe, and the best place to do that was under police protection." He shook his head, tears blurring his vision. "Then why not tell me everything? Why keep secrets? I don't know who to trust." Elena took a cautious step forward. "I didn't know how much you could handle, and frankly, there are officers I'm not sure I can trust. You saw how your mother's files are sealed. There might be people inside the department who'd sell her out if they knew where she was. I was trying to protect you from that, but if you overheard my call, I understand why you'd be scared." A swirl of conflicting emotions raged inside Noah. Part of him wanted to believe her. Another part of him remained suspicious. "Why do you think my mom left me a note telling me not to trust anyone?" he asked in a trembling voice. "Because she knew how dangerous these people could be," Elena answered softly. "She didn't want you relying on someone who might betray you. But I'm not your enemy, Noah. I promise." Sofia let out a small whimper. Without hesitation, Elena reached into her coat pocket and withdrew a small bottle of water, offering it to Noah. "For the baby," she said gently. "She must be thirsty after the long walk." Noah hesitated, then accepted the water. He dabbed a few drops on Sofia's lips, and she sucked hungrily at the moisture. Watching Elena's careful stance, he realized she wasn't drawing a weapon or signaling anyone. She just seemed worried. Then he recalled the folder in his bag. "I found documents," he confessed, "about the syndicate and pictures of my mom with Damian Carter. It looked like they were working together. Or maybe they were both in witness protection?" Elena nodded, her eyes briefly flicking to the open locker. "That would explain why Carter faked his death. He might have done it to escape the syndicate's retaliation. Your mom probably thought he had gone too far or broken his deal with law enforcement. That might be why she told you to stay away from him. Maybe she no longer trusted him." Noah's mind churned with 1,000 questions, but fear of the unknown overshadowed them all. "What do I do now?" he asked in a small voice, cradling Sofia closer. Elena took another careful step forward until she was close enough to place a hand gently on his shoulder. He flinched, but didn't pull away. "For now, we need to get you two somewhere safe. There's a reason your mom left these documents here. She must have been preparing for the day she'd have to go on the run again. If we can decipher what's in them, maybe we can find her before the syndicate does." Lightning flashed in the distance, highlighting the station's decaying walls. A low rumble of thunder followed. The air felt charged, as though another storm was brewing. Noah gazed around the forsaken building, imagining his mother standing in this very spot as she stashed the evidence that might save her life. He swallowed hard. "All right," he said, voice wavering but laced with resolve. "I'll go with you, but promise me, you'll help me find her, and if there's anyone in the police I shouldn't trust, I'll keep them away from you," Elena assured him. "I promise." He scooped up the duffel bag, careful to keep Sofia shielded. Just as they turned to leave, a harsh squeak echoed from somewhere beyond the foyer. Elena froze, her posture tense, hand inching toward her holster. "Someone else is here," she whispered. "We need to move." Noah's heart thundered in his chest. Together they hurried toward the station's shattered entrance, guided by the flickering light of Elena's flashlight. Behind them, footsteps reverberated ominously, drawing closer. The wind picked up, sending debris skittering across the floor in a ghostly dance. Noah cast one final glance at the station's interior before stepping out into the night. He knew they'd just crossed a dangerous threshold. Any illusions of safety were gone. He held Sofia tight as Elena led him into the darkness, away from the unknown figure lurking in the shadows of the abandoned station. If the syndicate was already on their trail, they had precious little time to unlock the secrets in Rebecca's files, and in the stillness of the night, Noah silently prayed they weren't too late. Night pressed down on the city, its darkness broken only by the dim glow of distant streetlights and the stuttering flash of passing cars. Noah clutched Sofia in one arm and lugged the duffel bag with the other. Detective Elena Morales led him at a brisk pace across the deserted lot outside the abandoned train station. A biting wind ruffled her dark hair, and she moved with quiet urgency. They slipped behind a row of derelict warehouses, trying to stay out of sight from whoever had been lurking in the station. Gravel crunched underfoot, and the smell of damp earth mingled with rusted metal. Though they were now outside, Noah felt no safer than he had inside the decrepit halls. His heart hammered against his rib cage, every nerve on high alert. Elena halted at a corner where the glow of a flickering street lamp cast dancing shadows across the pavement. She glanced around, brow furrowed. "My car is parked nearby, but we need to be careful," she whispered. "If someone followed us from the station, they may be watching." Noah nodded, swallowing a lump of fear. He tightened his hold on Sofia, who stirred but remained mostly quiet. The baby seemed almost preternaturally calm, as if she sensed that crying now might alert dangerous ears. Together they ducked behind a rusted chain-link fence. Beyond it, Elena's sedan sat alone in a small parking lot. Just as they stepped forward to make a dash for the vehicle, a voice, low and menacing, called out from the darkness, "Detective Morales!" Noah's blood ran cold. They froze. A man emerged from behind a shipping container, face partially concealed beneath the brim of a baseball cap. He wore dark clothing, and the faint glint of metal at his waist suggested a firearm. Another figure moved in the shadows behind him. Elena edged her body in front of Noah and Sofia. "Who are you?" she demanded, voice steady, though her hands flexed at her sides in preparation. "Police officer. Identify yourself." The man let out a humorless chuckle. "We're just old friends of Rebecca Castillo," he drawled. "Seems she's gotten herself mixed up in a federal mess, and we want to have a word with her. Think you can help us out?" Noah felt the tension in Elena's posture. He sensed she was gauging her next move, reach for her gun, distract them, or stall for time. "I don't know where Rebecca is," she replied, her tone measured. "She disappeared. If you're looking for her, you're wasting your time here." "Now that's not what we heard," the man countered, taking a step closer. Light from the street lamp revealed a lean face, a day's worth of stubble on his jaw. "Word is, her kid might know something, and we heard you've been keeping him at the station." Elena clenched her fists. "He's under police protection," she said firmly. "You're interfering with an active investigation. I suggest you back off." A second man joined the first, stepping out of the shadows. He was broader in build, face obscured by a hood. "Just hand over the boy and nobody gets hurt," he growled. "We'll let the detective walk away. But we want the kid and whatever he's carrying." Noah's pulse skyrocketed. The duffel bag in his hand suddenly felt as heavy as a boulder. He realized these men likely knew about the documents, and possibly the money Rebecca had stashed away. A flicker of anger kindled within him. His mother had risked everything to protect them from creeps like these. He refused to become their pawn. Elena carefully reached back, pressing a reassuring hand to Noah's shoulder. "Over my dead body," she said, voice tight with contempt. The first man's lips curved into a slow, mocking grin. "That's easy enough to arrange." He lunged, drawing a gun from beneath his jacket. In a swift, practiced motion, Elena shoved Noah aside, placing her body between him and the attacker. She whipped out her own firearm and fired off a warning shot. The crack echoed through the empty lot, sending the men ducking for cover behind the shipping container. Noah scrambled, adrenaline roaring in his ears as he tightened his grip on Sofia. He spotted an alleyway to their left, dark, strewn with garbage bins, but possibly offering a path to slip away. Elena yelled over her shoulder, "Go! Get to the car if you can!" Then she returned her focus to the armed men, determined to keep them pinned. Clutching the duffel bag in one hand and Sofia against his chest with the other, Noah darted toward the alley. Shots rang out behind him, spurring him forward. He heard Elena's voice, steady, commanding, shouting for backup into her phone or radio. He could only pray that she'd hold her ground long enough for them to escape. He ducked behind a dumpster, lungs burning, and peeked around the corner. The sedan was maybe 30 yards away, out in the open. Both men were exchanging gunfire with Elena now, bullets ricocheting off metal. At least she was drawing their attention. If he could reach the car unnoticed, he might be able to start it, though he'd never driven a car in his life. The thought was both ridiculous and sobering. Sofia whimpered at the sudden noise, and Noah patted her back to keep her calm. He felt a surge of guilt. She was just a baby caught in a storm of adult threats and bullets. But there was no turning back now. His mother's note had made it clear: protect Sofia at all costs. A lull in the gunfire gave him courage. Holding Sofia close, he sprinted out from behind the dumpster and beelined for the sedan. Miraculously, he made it to the passenger side door without a shot fired his way. His hands trembled as he tried the door handle, locked. He cursed under his breath, uncertain if Elena had left the keys inside or if they were in her pocket. Behind him, shouts escalated. One of the men cursed in pain, likely grazed by Elena's bullet. Noah crouched by the car, mind racing for options. If she had the keys on her, they were out of luck. He dared a glance back toward the shipping container. The two men had found better cover, firing sporadically at Elena, who was pinned behind a stack of wooden pallets. Noah watched, horrified, as one of the men circled around, trying to flank her. She pivoted and shot at him, forcing him to drop behind the container. He roared in frustration. The second man barked something about calling the others, making Noah's stomach clench. More criminals could be on the way. Panic churned in his gut. If he did nothing, Elena might be overwhelmed. She was risking her life for them. The memory of the gun in the duffel bag surged to mind, a terrifying yet potent detail. Slowly, he crouched, placing Sofia gently on the ground beside the passenger door, out of view. Then, with shaking hands, he unzipped the duffel. Sure enough, the small handgun was tucked beneath the documents and stacks of money. He lifted it gingerly, heart pounding like a drum in his ears. He had never fired a gun in his life. The weight of the weapon felt alien, and his breath came in ragged gasps. But if the men overwhelmed Elena, none of them would survive. Don't trust anyone. His mother's words reverberated, but trust or no trust, Elena was risking her life to protect him. He couldn't just watch her go down. Steeling himself, Noah slid the gun into his waistband, swallowing the lump of fear in his throat. He then scooped up Sofia, quickly zipping the duffel. "It's okay," he whispered to her trembling form, though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. Another volley of shots rang out, and Elena cried out as if she'd been hit. Panic seized him. "Elena!" he called, half rising from his crouch. He saw her clutching her shoulder, her blazer torn, blood staining the fabric. One of the men advanced, gun aimed. Fear turned to desperate resolve. Clasping Sofia tight, Noah sprinted around the car, taking cover at a different angle, and carefully set her down again where she wouldn't be in direct line of fire. Summoning courage, he tugged the gun from his waistband. His hands shook so badly he feared he might drop it. He inched forward, edging around the hood of the sedan to get a line of sight. He wasn't aiming to kill. He doubted he even could. He just wanted to scare them off, buy Elena a chance to escape. Summoning everything he had, he raised the weapon and pulled the trigger. The recoil slammed his wrist, and the bullet pinged into the side of a shipping container, nowhere near the men. But the sudden noise startled them, and they ducked, firing wild shots in Noah's direction. One bullet shattered the sedan's windshield, sending glass spraying. He flinched, shielding his face, heart hammering out of his chest. That was enough for Elena to scramble away from the pallets, pressing her shoulder wound to stem the bleeding. She sprinted across the open space and dove behind another large metal structure. A swirl of confusion and shouting followed. One of the men spotted Noah and roared, "It's the kid! Grab him!" The other cursed, reloading in haste. More bullets whizzed overhead. Fear threatened to paralyze Noah, but he forced himself to move to keep Sofia safe at all costs. He ducked behind the car again, panting, hugging the baby to his chest. The gun felt scorching in his hand. He had no idea how many rounds were left. A wave of hopelessness threatened to engulf him. He was just a boy, outmatched by armed criminals who had no qualms about shooting. Yet the thought of giving up never crossed his mind. This was for Sofia, for Rebecca, and even for Elena. Suddenly, the wail of sirens split the night. Red and blue lights flashed across the buildings, cutting through the darkness. The two men exchanged alarmed glances. Elena had managed to call for backup, or perhaps someone in the vicinity had reported gunfire. Either way, the men realized their window was closing. One of them barked a harsh order. "Move! We'll come back for the kid!" They bolted for a black SUV parked in the shadows. The engine roared to life, tires screeching as they tore away. A second later, two police cruisers skidded into the lot, headlights raking across the scene. Noah sank to the ground, relief mingling with bone-deep exhaustion. The duffel slid off his shoulder, the contents clinking. Sofia whimpered and he kissed the top of her head, letting out a shaky breath. Officers poured out of the cruisers, weapons drawn, scanning the area for threats. A few ran to check on Elena, who was sitting on the ground against a metal barrel, pressing a cloth to her wounded shoulder. An older officer with a kind face hurried over to Noah. "Son, are you all right?" he asked, voice brimming with concern. Noah could only nod, eyes stinging with unshed tears. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He managed a hoarse whisper. "Detective Morales is hurt." The officer waved for paramedics, who rushed over to Elena, administering first aid. She glanced in Noah's direction, offering the barest of reassuring smiles. "You did good," she mouthed, a slight tremor shaking her. Noah pressed his lips together, unsure whether he'd done anything worthwhile besides firing a single wild shot. But at least he and Sofia were alive, and so was Elena. Within minutes, the scene swarmed with uniforms and flashing lights. One officer attempted to pry the gun from Noah's grip, and he reluctantly handed it over, still shaking. Another tried to take Sofia so the paramedics could check him for injuries, but he refused to let go of her until they assured him she'd be safe in an ambulance. After a brief standoff, he allowed them to strap him and Sofia together on the gurney, giving them both a chance to be examined under the paramedics' watchful eyes. By the time the chaos settled, the black SUV carrying the attackers was long gone. Officers cordoned off the area, taking statements and combing for evidence. Elena was placed on a stretcher for transport to the hospital, but she insisted on speaking to Noah first. She gently brushed a hand over Sofia's cheek, then looked into Noah's eyes, her voice trembling from pain and adrenaline. "They won't stop, Noah," she said quietly, her gaze flicking to the duffel bag. "They want what's in there. Your mom's intel. You need to trust me. We'll keep you safe." Tears finally spilled down his cheeks, a mix of relief, terror, and overwhelming fatigue. "I believe you," he managed, recalling the risk she'd taken, the bullet she'd taken to protect them. If anything, that was proof enough of her sincerity. As Elena was wheeled away, a wave of guilt and gratitude surged through him. He'd been so suspicious, so ready to run from everyone. Yet her actions had shown she was willing to put her life on the line to protect him and Sofia. Perhaps not everyone was untrustworthy. Perhaps his mother's warning had meant something more nuanced. Trust only those who proved themselves through their deeds. The paramedics loaded Noah and Sofia into a second ambulance. Red and blue lights flashed across his tear-streaked face as the doors closed. His entire body trembled, adrenaline draining away to leave raw exhaustion. He clutched Sofia tightly, vowing to himself that this nightmare wouldn't be in vain. They'd come too far for him to crumble now. In that tense, suffocating ride to the hospital, Noah made a promise. He would see this through, for Sofia, for his mother, and for the detective who'd nearly given her life to shield them. However terrifying the road ahead might be, he would do whatever it took to uncover the truth and keep his family safe. An uneasy silence settled in the dimly lit hospital corridor. The overhead fluorescents buzzed softly, their glow reflecting off the pale green walls. Noah sat in a plastic chair near the nurse's station, Sofia asleep in his arms. He wore a borrowed hoodie over his clothes, courtesy of a sympathetic paramedic who'd seen him shiver uncontrollably upon arrival. Across the hall, an armed officer stood guard at the door of Damian Carter's room. Another officer patrolled the corridor, periodically peeking inside to check on Noah. Despite the warmth of the hoodie, a chill gripped Noah's bones. The events at the train station and the subsequent shootout played over and over in his head. His only consolation was that Elena was out of surgery. She'd taken a bullet to the shoulder, and while her condition was serious, doctors assured him she would survive. He hadn't been allowed to see her yet, but at least she was alive. Every so often, the officer guarding Carter's room would disappear inside, presumably to consult with doctors or check on Carter's condition. They'd told Noah that the man was still weak but conscious, drifting in and out of lucidity. The possibility of speaking to him stirred a cocktail of dread and hope within Noah. Damian Carter, the man his mother had warned him to avoid at all costs, might be the only person capable of unraveling the mystery of her disappearance. He sighed, shifting Sofia in his lap as the nurse at the station gave him a gentle smile. She seemed to sense his anxiety but maintained a respectful distance. Noah's heart thumped uncomfortably every time footsteps approached, fearing it could be the criminals from the station, back to finish the job. The presence of armed police all around was only a partial comfort. He knew from Elena's words that someone in law enforcement might be compromised. A sudden commotion near Carter's door broke the silence. The guard stepped out, exchanging urgent whispers with another officer. The second officer nodded, then quickly strode toward Noah. He was a tall man with close-cropped hair and intense gray eyes. "Noah Castillo?" he asked. Noah nodded, standing protectively with Sofia still in his arms. The officer's gaze softened at the sight of the baby. "Carter is awake," he said gently. "He wants to speak with you." Noah blinked, stunned. "Why me?" "He asked specifically for Rebecca's boy," the officer explained. "Look, I'll stay in the room with you to ensure your safety, but if he's willing to talk, maybe you can learn something about your mom's whereabouts." Fear twisted Noah's stomach. He recalled the look of terror in Rebecca's eyes when she'd warned him to stay away from Damian Carter. Yet, if Carter had new information, how could Noah not take this chance? Gingerly, he nodded, hugging Sofia tight. "All right," he whispered. "I'll talk to him." The officer led him across the hall into a small hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and stale air. Machines beeped softly, and the curtains were drawn against the night's darkness. On the bed lay a pale man, bandages covering much of his upper torso. Though his face was gaunt, his eyes flickered with a feverish intensity. Damian Carter turned his head at their entrance. His gaze locked onto Noah, and for a moment, a flicker of something like regret or compassion crossed his features. He inhaled shakily. "You're Rebecca's son," he murmured, voice raspy from disuse. His gaze drifted to Sofia, and his expression softened. "And that must be your sister." Noah hovered near the foot of the bed, uncertain whether to speak. He felt the officer's presence behind him, a small reassurance. Finally, he found his voice. "My mom said to stay away from you," he said, trying to sound braver than he felt. A faint, humorless smile tugged at the corners of Carter's mouth. "I don't blame her," he replied. "I'm not exactly on her list of trusted allies these days." Noah stepped closer, keeping a careful distance. Sofia stirred, fussing a bit, and he rocked her gently. "Why? What happened between you two?" Carter's eyes closed for a moment as though replaying old memories in his mind. "We were both part of a federal operation years ago. Your mother was an informant providing intel on a criminal syndicate. I was undercover, feeding information back to the authorities. We clashed. Disagreements, arguments over strategy, but we shared a common goal, destroying that syndicate before it destroyed us." He coughed, wincing at the pain in his chest. After a moment, he continued, voice quieter. "When our cover was blown, we had to vanish. Your mother and I arranged to fake my death so she could secure witness protection for herself and you. Then unborn Sofia was just a possibility, but something went wrong. She believed I double-crossed her. Maybe she had reason to." Noah tried to process Carter's words. The idea that his mother and this man had once been allies and that Carter had faked his death felt surreal. Were you working with the police or with someone else? Carter's eyes flicked to the officer in the room, then back to Noah. His voice came out with an edge of bitterness. We had a contact in federal law enforcement, but there's corruption everywhere. Some agents were on the syndicate's payroll leaking info. I suspected our contact was compromised. Rebecca thought differently. Our trust in each other shattered. Noah braced himself. Do you know where my mom is now? The man exhaled, pained. If she's truly on the run again, it means the syndicate has found her, or is close. I only know of one place she might hide if everything fell apart, an old safe house in the outskirts, near the state line. We used it as a backup plan if our main strategy failed. We kept it stocked with supplies, a car under fake plates, enough to slip away into a new life. She must be there, or planning to get there. A spark of hope ignited in Noah's chest. Where exactly is this safe house? Carter's lips pressed into a thin line. I'll tell you, but you have to promise to bring the authorities who actually want to protect her. No loose ends this time. He hesitated. I messed up in the past. If I can help fix this, maybe that's my way of redeeming myself. Noah glanced at the officer standing by the door. The man gave a slight nod, his face revealing no skepticism. Carter then revealed a specific address near the state border, a remote cabin accessible by a long dirt road. The officer took down the details, radioing them to the station to confirm. Carter let out a heavy breath, as if a great weight had been lifted from his chest. Before Noah could say more, the door flung open and a second officer rushed in, agitation painted on his features. Damian Carter, he said briskly, ignoring Noah as he addressed the bed-bound man. We need an official statement from you regarding your involvement with the Castillo woman and the shootout at the old station. The abruptness of his tone made Noah uneasy. The officer behind him stiffened as well. Carter clenched his jaw, shifting uncomfortably in his bed. I've said what I need to. Talk to Detective Morales. The new officer cut him off, brandishing a set of handcuffs. You're still under suspicion, Carter. Don't think providing an address absolves you of your criminal ties. Noah's eyes widened, remembering Elena's warning that not everyone in law enforcement could be trusted. But the officer behind him stepped forward, voice firm. Wait. We have direct instructions from Detective Morales to keep Carter secured, but not to process him until we get a full statement. He's severely injured and a crucial witness. Tension flared between the two officers, each regarding the other with palpable distrust. Noah's anxiety spiked. Could this new officer be connected to the syndicate, looking to silence Carter? Before a confrontation could erupt, the nurse stormed in, scolding everyone for crowding the patient. Seizing the moment, Noah slipped out into the hallway with Sofia still in his arms. His head pounded with the possibility that his mother might be holed up in that safe house, alone, waiting for an opportunity to surface. Meanwhile, criminals still roamed the streets, and there might be compromised officers within these walls. Torn between the desire to help Elena and the urgent need to find his mom, he felt paralyzed. Just then, the kind-faced older officer from the night before approached. Noah, come with me, he said gently, guiding him away from the tension. He led him to a small waiting area where a vending machine hummed softly under fluorescent lights. We're going to get you somewhere safer, he continued. We have a secure facility while we sort things out. Noah stiffened. I can't just sit around. My mom might be, He was cut off by the sudden wail of an alarm echoing through the corridor, followed by frantic voices. He's gone, someone yelled. Damian Carter is gone. The older officer cursed under his breath, rushing back toward Carter's room. Noah's eyes widened. How could Carter just vanish from a hospital bed, injured as he was? Chaos erupted in the hallway, nurses scrambling, officers shouting orders. In the confusion, Noah found himself alone in the waiting area. He rocked Sofia in an attempt to keep her from crying. The echoes of footsteps and shouts seemed to swirl around him. Could Carter have escaped on his own? Or had someone taken him? An ally or an enemy? Every scenario pointed to more danger ahead. Noah wanted to see Elena, to hear her calm voice, but she was still recovering from surgery. He was at the mercy of a system where trust was precarious and betrayal lurked at every corner. In the midst of the commotion, his gaze snagged on a phone at the empty nurse's station. He recalled the address Carter had provided. If the police grew entangled in bureaucracy or internal corruption, his mother might slip away or be caught by the syndicate first. The thought terrified him. Though he was only 10, with a baby in tow, an urgent, almost reckless determination seized him. He had to get to that safe house. His mind replayed all the near misses, the swirling threats, Elena's gunshot wound, and Carter's cryptic words. Like it or not, he might be the only one who truly cared about finding Rebecca for the right reasons. Gently cradling Sofia, he inched toward an unattended corridor. He overheard officers yelling about lockdown procedures and scanning security footage. But in the general turmoil, no one was paying attention to one small boy and a baby. He found a staff elevator used for transporting patients. The metal doors slid open, revealing an empty interior. He glanced over his shoulder, throat tight. If he left the hospital, he'd be on his own again. Then he pictured his mother's face, how she'd looked that rainy night when she vanished into the storm. Her fear was so tangible that it had burned itself into his memory. If she was holed up in that cabin, she needed help. And if the syndicate reached her first, summoning courage, he stepped into the elevator. When the doors closed, he felt as if he'd sealed his fate. Protect Sofia, he reminded himself, recalling the note. Don't trust anyone. But trust might be fluid. He had trusted Elena when her actions warranted it. Now, with Elena sidelined by her injuries, it was up to him. Down in the lobby, panic reigned. An alarm blared, and the security personnel were busy blocking exits. Hospital staff tried to corral visitors into waiting areas. Thinking quickly, Noah turned down a service hallway that led to the ambulance bay. There, he spotted an emergency exit with a push bar. Without hesitation, he pressed it, ignoring the shrill alarm that erupted. Harsh night air slapped him in the face as he slipped outside with Sofia, scanning the area for a route of escape. A single ambulance was parked in the bay, lights off, engine silent. The driver's door stood ajar. Possibly the driver had rushed inside amid the chaos. Noah hurried past it, scanning the darkness for any sign of patrolling officers. Eerie shadows sprawled across the pavement, and the hush of night closed in around him once more. He had no money, no transportation, and no clear plan on how to navigate to that remote address. Yet he pressed forward. For the second time in as many days, he found himself sneaking away, clutching Sofia, guided only by the conviction that he had to save his mother. Overhead, clouds obscured the moon, leaving the hospital lot bathed in an otherworldly half-light. An idea struck him. He recalled glimpsing a police cruiser left unattended near the side entrance earlier. If he could find it, maybe he could hide there until morning or look for a map or radio. It was a long shot, but it beat wandering aimlessly in the night. He ducked behind a row of hedges, creeping along until he found the cruiser, indeed empty, keys still in the ignition. Through the window, he could see the radio clipped to the console. He felt a pang of guilt. This was definitely breaking the law, but desperate times left him no alternative. Setting Sofia in the passenger seat, he clambered in. The keys dangled from the ignition, and the radio crackled with frantic chatter. All units, suspect Damian Carter is at large, wearing hospital gown. Approach with caution. Additional perimeter requested at... Noah steadied his trembling hands, ignoring the swirling confusion in the radio chatter. He twisted the key just enough to power up the dashboard. Lights blinked, and the engine purred. He struggled to reach the pedals, eventually pressing them with his toes. He barely knew how to drive, but maybe, if he took it slow, he could at least get away from the hospital. Sofia started whimpering, the motion scaring her. "Shh," he whispered, gently stroking her hair. "We'll be okay, I promise." A hollow promise, perhaps, but he needed to cling to hope. Gritting his teeth, he shifted the car into drive. He'd watched enough adults to know the basics. The cruiser lurched forward, nearly scraping a lamppost. Once he steadied the wheel, he inched out of the parking lot. No one seemed to notice amid the chaos. Headlights off, he navigated into the street, heart hammering louder than the engine. The night stretched ahead, a labyrinth of roads that led who knew where, but Noah's mind remained fixed on Carter's words. A safe house near the state line, a dirt road off Route 27. If there was any chance his mother was there, he had to try. And so, with Sofia cradled in the passenger seat and fear gnawing at his insides, he drove off into the darkness, determined to rescue Rebecca before it was too late. The hours before sunrise blurred into a tapestry of desperation, determination, and blind luck as Noah guided the police cruiser along winding roads. His hands were clammy on the steering wheel, and every bump in the asphalt jostled Sofia, prompting small whimpers that tore at his heart. He managed to soothe her with soft coos and quiet lullabies, though he couldn't calm his own nerves. Billboards and road signs whipped past, illuminated sporadically by the cruiser's headlights. The radio on the dashboard continued to chatter with updates about Carter's escape and the search for a missing boy, which made Noah cringe with guilt. He knew Elena wouldn't want him risking his life like this, but she wasn't here to stop him. Eventually, he spotted a battered sign indicating Route 27. He turned onto a narrower country road that soon became a rugged path cutting through a dense forest. The cruiser's shocks rattled as he maneuvered around potholes. Trees formed a canopy overhead, their branches stark against a starless sky. Anxiety built with each mile. If Carter's information was wrong, or if the syndicate had beaten him here, this journey could end in tragedy. At last, the path opened onto a clearing. There, perched on a slight rise, stood a small cabin. Its windows were dark, and the entire structure looked worn by time and weather. Noah pulled the cruiser to a stop behind a thicket of bushes, turning off the headlights. For a moment, he simply listened. No voices, no cars, no sign of movement. He gently unbuckled Sofia and cradled her against his chest, stepping out onto the dewy grass. The night air was cold, a chill creeping under his borrowed hoodie. "Mom," he called softly, voice trembling. Only silence answered. Despite the quiet, his pulse raced. He remembered how Elena had been shot in a place just as quiet, how men with guns had emerged from the shadows. His mother could be anywhere, inside or gone. Was it too late? And if she was inside, would she be all right? He made his way to the cabin door, stepping onto a small porch whose wooden planks creaked underfoot. With a trembling hand, he tried the knob. Locked. Unsure what else to do, he rapped softly on the door. "Mom," he said again, a touch louder. For a moment, nothing. Then the door clicked and swung inward an inch. Noah froze. Someone was inside. The flicker of a candle's glow emerged from the crack, and he heard quick, panicked breathing. Then a trembling voice, almost unrecognizable in its anxiety, said his name. "Noah?" His heart leapt. "Mom," he gasped. The door opened wider, revealing Rebecca Castillo, eyes wide and rimmed with exhaustion. Her once smooth hair was disheveled, face pale as though haunted by sleepless nights. She snatched him into a fierce embrace, mindless of the baby between them, until she realized Sofia was there. With gentle arms, she gathered both children against her chest, tears spilling down her cheeks. "My babies," she whispered, voice hitching. "Oh God, I was so afraid you wouldn't get away from them." Noah clung to her, tears burning his eyes. In that moment, relief overwhelmed every other emotion, even though a storm of questions brewed in his mind. Rebecca ushered them inside, quickly bolting the door behind them. The cabin was sparsely furnished, a single lantern illuminating a dingy living area. Blankets and canned food were strewn about, along with various supplies that looked like they had been hastily rummaged through. "How did you find me?" Rebecca asked, voice thick with emotion as she ran trembling fingers through Noah's hair, checking him for injuries. She placed a gentle kiss on Sofia's head, who squirmed, but then relaxed at the familiarity of her mother's scent. Noah exhaled shakily. "Damian Carter told me. He said you might come here." A flicker of anger and surprise crossed her face at Carter's name. "He's alive?" she demanded, as if she still couldn't believe it. Then her eyes softened with worry. "So he told you about our past?" Noah nodded, rummaging for words. "Some of it. He said you were both working against the syndicate, that you faked his death. Mom, why did you leave us?" The question tore from him before he could stop it, raw with hurt and confusion. Rebecca sank onto a threadbare couch, pressing a palm to her forehead. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. "I didn't want to leave," she whispered. "I had no choice. They found me, Noah. The syndicate or what's left of it. I saw someone lurking outside the house. I knew they'd come for me, and I couldn't let them hurt you or Sofia. I ran to draw them away, but everything happened so fast. I never wanted you to be in danger." Her tears glistened in the flickering lantern light. Noah placed a comforting hand on her knee, passing Sofia to her mother's arms. In that moment, the baby cooed, recognizing her mother, and the tension in the cabin lessened slightly. Still, a question gnawed at him. "You told me not to trust anyone, but Detective Morales, she helped us a lot. She got shot protecting us." Rebecca's lips parted in surprise. "She's alive? God, I was worried the department might be compromised." She closed her eyes, battling fresh tears. "I didn't mean no one at all, but I couldn't be sure who was safe. The police force. It's complicated. Some might be on the syndicate's payroll." Noah recalled Elena's phone call, how suspicious it had seemed at first, and how she'd proven her loyalty in blood. "She's in the hospital," he said quietly. "She'll be okay, but she can't protect us from there. And the men who shot at us, Mom, they almost killed her. They want what's in that bag." He set the duffel on the floor. Rebecca glanced at it, sighing. "Right, the documents. They detail the syndicate's operations, including names of crooked agents and big players. Enough evidence to lock them away for life, or so I hoped." She looked up at Noah, gratitude and sorrow mingling in her features. "Thank you for bringing it. I was going to come back for you both once I threw them off my trail, but guess that didn't work out." A heavy silence fell. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, and the old cabin groaned. Noah could sense the weight of the danger still closing in on them. He glanced around, noticing the single window had been reinforced with wooden planks. Rebecca had indeed prepared for a siege, if necessary, but how long could they hold out? "We need to get this stuff to the right people," Noah ventured. "Someone we can trust." Rebecca nodded warily. "I thought about that, but I'm not sure who's still clean. Maybe the feds. But we need a direct line to someone high up, someone I knew from the old operation who isn't compromised." She swallowed, a flicker of resolve replacing her despair. "Elena Morales, maybe. If we can get her personal contact or a safe channel, she might connect us to an honest federal agent." Before they could decide on a plan, a distinct roar of engines pierced the quiet. Rebecca's eyes widened, terror coursing through her. Noah rushed to the window, peering through a sliver between the wooden planks. Headlights cut through the darkness. Multiple vehicles were approaching, tires crunching on gravel. It didn't look like the police. No sirens, no visible markings, just the glare of headlights fanning out in the clearing. A sense of dread coiled around Noah's spine. "They found us," he breathed. "Mom, we have to hide." Rebecca pressed Sofia into his arms, then moved to the rickety table in the corner, rummaging for the handgun she'd stashed there. Her face was a mask of determination, though fear shimmered in her eyes. "There's a cellar out back," she said in a hurried whisper. "Go, hide with Sofia, I'll hold them off." Noah's heart lurched at the thought of leaving her alone. "But go," she hissed. "You've done enough. If they catch me, they'll leave you be once they have the documents." She offered a shaky grin. "I'll buy you time to escape if it comes to that." His throat closed, tears threatening again, but one look at his mother's set jaw told him there was no point in arguing. Clutching Sofia, he nodded. He grabbed the duffel, then unlatched the back door. The night air struck him with a chill that prickled his skin. He could hear the men stepping out of their vehicles, barking orders to each other. He hurried around the side of the cabin, heart pounding, until he found a small cellar door set into the ground, half concealed by tall grass. He tugged it open and slipped inside, gently lowering Sofia and the duffel. The space smelled of earth and mold, and he fumbled in the darkness until he found a corner to crouch in, keeping Sofia close. Through a gap in the cellar door, faint light filtered in, revealing boxes of canned goods and a few tools stacked along the walls. Outside, the first gunshot rang out, sending a thunderous jolt through Noah's body. He clapped a hand over Sofia's mouth, praying she wouldn't cry. She whimpered softly, but seemed to understand the need for silence. Another shot. Then voices, harsh and threatening. He recognized the men's tone from the confrontation at the station lot. They demanded Rebecca hand over the documents. Noah's mind churned with fear, guilt, and a frantic impulse to help, but he forced himself to remain still. Rebecca's plan was to draw them away, let them believe she had the duffel. If it meant they'd leave him and Sofia alone, it was the only shot they had. Tears slid down his cheeks as he heard scuffling above, shouts, another burst of gunfire. He rocked Sofia gently, trying to shield her ears from the onslaught. For what felt like an eternity, chaos reigned, men barking orders, Rebecca cursing, bullets splintering wood. Noah bit his lips so hard he tasted blood. He prayed for any sign of rescue, perhaps police sirens or the arrival of Elena's colleagues. But the night remained filled only with the echo of violence. A sudden hush fell. Heart hammering, Noah waited, straining to hear any clue as to what had happened. Then muffled footsteps crunched around the side of the cabin, very close to the cellar entrance. He froze, breath caught in his throat. The door above him rattled slightly as if someone tested it. Noah's blood turned to ice. He pressed himself against the cellar wall, holding Sofia so tightly she began to fuss. "Noah?" a voice called, a woman's voice, barely audible. "Noah, are you here?" He recognized it instantly. "Mom!" he rasped, tears overflowing. He pushed the cellar door open, nearly tripping as he emerged into the night. Rebecca staggered into his arms, trembling, face streaked with blood and grime. A bullet had grazed her leg, and she clutched a wound at her side, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. "The men?" Noah whispered, scanning the dim clearing. He spotted bodies on the ground, and one of the vehicles crashed into a tree. The other had peeled away, its tracks fresh in the mud. "They retreated," Rebecca panted, leaning on him for support. "Some are down, the rest fled. They'll regroup." In the distance, faintly, Noah heard sirens at last. Police, or perhaps an ambulance. He guided Rebecca toward the cabin's front porch, tears coursing down his face as they stumbled together. Her injuries looked severe, but she maintained consciousness, arms cradling Sofia protectively when Noah passed her over. Finally, police cruisers tore onto the property, lights flashing. Officers spilled out, weapons raised, scanning the scene for any remaining threats. One of them rushed to Rebecca's side, calling for a medic. In the confusion, Noah looked up to see a familiar figure stepping out of a car. Detective Elena Morales, her arm in a sling, face drawn but alive and determined. She locked eyes with Noah across the chaotic yard. Relief and pride flashed in her gaze. Officers quickly surrounded them, securing the cabin and calling in backup to search the woods. Paramedics descended on Rebecca, stabilizing her. Elena hurried over, ignoring her own injury, pulling Noah into a gentle, one-armed embrace. "You found her," she whispered, a tremor of emotion in her voice. "You did it, Noah." He clung to her, all the terror and exhaustion of the past days erupting in a series of sobs. "She's hurt," he gasped. "Please help her." Elena squeezed his shoulder. "We will, and we'll get you all to safety," she promised. As paramedics lifted Rebecca onto a stretcher, she reached for Noah's hand, eyes shining with gratitude. Sofia dozed in her arms, her tiny chest rising and falling in peaceful slumber. Rebecca's free hand pressed a folder, one of the critical documents, into Elena's grasp. "Finish this," she said through gritted teeth. "End them for good." Elena nodded, stepping back as the medics rushed Rebecca toward an ambulance. Noah followed closely, refusing to be separated from his mother again. Another wave of vehicles arrived, flooding the clearing with light and noise. In that whirlwind of flashing lights, sirens, and urgent voices, the tension that had coiled around Noah's heart slowly began to unwind. He climbed into the ambulance beside Rebecca, cradling Sofia. The doors shut, sealing them in a momentary pocket of calm. Outside, officers secured the scene and took the battered criminals into custody. Elena's figure was visible through the back window, talking to a federal agent who'd just arrived. A new day loomed on the horizon. Hours later, as the first rays of dawn broke over the hospital where Rebecca was being treated, Noah stood by her bedside, Sofia sleeping in a bassinet nearby. Bandaged and pale, Rebecca opened her eyes to see her children safe. Tears mingled with her smile. Elena entered quietly, her sling more noticeable in the daylight, but her eyes warm with relief. She approached Rebecca's bedside. "Your documents have been passed up the chain," she said softly. "The evidence is solid. The syndicate won't be able to hide anymore." Rebecca nodded, exhaustion evident in every breath. "Thank you," she managed, voice hoarse. Elena looked down at Noah, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You're one brave kid," she said. "Braver than anyone should have to be at your age." Noah's face burned with a mixture of embarrassment and pride. "I just did what I had to," he mumbled. Then he looked at his mother, recalling all the chaos, betrayal, and near-death experiences that had brought them to this moment. Despite everything, they were together now, alive, hopeful. It was more than he dared dream of when that storm first woke him days ago. In the weeks that followed, the syndicate members who'd survived were caught and indicted, their network dismantled. Damian Carter's whereabouts remained unknown. Rumors suggested he'd vanished for good this time, though an anonymous tip he provided led authorities to further proof of corruption. Elena kept a vigilant eye on the investigation, ensuring Rebecca's sealed records were now used to protect her rather than bury her. Eventually, mother and children were given fresh identities under a revised protection program, with Elena's personal assurance that no corrupt official would sabotage them again. On the day they left the hospital, Noah stood at the entrance with Sofia in one arm and his mother leaning on his other side, still limping. Elena handed them new identification documents in a discreet envelope. Then, with a lingering hug, she bid them farewell, though Noah suspected she'd visit if she could. The world outside shimmered with the promise of a new beginning. Morning sunlight glinted off the car that would take them to an undisclosed location. Noah inhaled, letting the crisp air fill his lungs. He was no longer the frightened boy who'd clutched his baby sister in a storm-ravaged house. He'd faced betrayal and danger, glimpsed the darkest corners of the adult world, and come out stronger. Cradling Sofia, he helped his mother into the back seat. As the car pulled away, he took one last look at the hospital, where so much of their fate had been decided. Elena stood on the curb, her sling gone, waving gently. He returned the wave, a silent thank you passing between them. Then the car turned a corner, leaving the past behind. Yes, there were scars, memories of gunfights, fear, and uncertainty, but they had each other. And as the sunlight bathed their faces, Noah felt a quiet certainty that they would carve out a life free from the shadows of the syndicate. In that soft glow of a new dawn, hope took root, and a mother's love for her children proved stronger than any storm or threat the world could hurl their way.